The late autumn sun poured over Sage Hollow Valley like a thin layer of warm ash, settling gently over time itself. A lone white pine stood at the center of the circular clearing, its shadow long and trembling in the evening breeze. Dark-winged birds circled once before disappearing behind the distant ridgeline, as if this place still guarded an ancient vow no one dared to speak aloud. The auction began without a bell. No bidding, no numbers, no names called. Only a man stepped out from the forest's edge, holding a long staff capped with silver, the head carved into the likeness of a crow. Chief Omen Raincrow. His hair was long and gray like early morning fog. Every step he took made no sound, even on the thick carpet of dry leaves. Perhaps it was because people believed he had walked among lost spirits long enough to know how not to frighten them. No one laughed. No one whispered. Though this was called an auction, no one came here for amusement. They came to make a choice, to decide whether they dared to bring home a creature the world had once deemed beyond saving. "We begin," Raincrow said, his voice low and deep, like a murmur rising from the earth's core. He didn't announce the items. He told stories. Each dog was introduced, not by tag or category, but by memory. The first was Kai, once freed from an illegal dog-fighting ring. The half-stitched knife wound still stretched along his belly. He flinched whenever metal clanged. Next came Luna, who had lived under a house for over 2 years. She never stepped through an open door without trembling. She moved only when she heard a lullaby. Then came Hopper, Blitz, Mina, each name a chapter once erased from the book of humanity, now rewritten across matted fur and sorrowful eyes. Offers began to form, not in numbers, but in actions. Some stepped into the circle and knelt, hand extended. Others dropped an old toy once cherished by a dog they'd lost. Some stood silently, as if apologizing on behalf of someone who once did something unforgivable. Some dogs stepped forward. Some shrank back. There were moments, brief and fragile, when eyes met, then broke apart under the weight of uncertainty. And then, a few names were chosen. Not bought. Chosen. Chief Raincrow nodded each time someone left the circle with a creature by their side. His gesture was like a quiet farewell, sending someone who'd been lost back home. As the sun shrank to a thin orange ribbon at the edge of the horizon, Raincrow did not call out another name, but those who had attended the auctions at Sage Hollow before knew. There was always one left for last. Not because it was least wanted, but because it was most deeply considered. And finally, Raincrow's voice dropped further, as if calling something not meant for the world of men. The one no one has ever approached. No one has ever made it stop growling. There were no sighs, no murmurs, just a pause. As if even the forest held its breath. Then, from the farthest edge of the circle, where light faded to dying embers on damp soil, a metal crate was wheeled out. It was unlike any crate brought here before. The frame was thicker, reinforced with crossbars. The paint had been clawed into deep grooves, as if teeth or talons had once tried to tear through it in rage. One corner was dented outward, exposing dark steel beneath. Evidence of past collisions with unyielding force. Whether struck or rammed from the inside, no one could say. Dried mud clung to the wheels, and the smell of old iron, burned wood, and long fermented sweat rose with every slow roll forward. A tattered silver tarp covered the crate, its edges torn, parts lifting in the breeze. But the darkness inside remained thick enough to conceal all, except one thing. Breath. Not rapid, not silent, but steady, heavy as the hiss of a manual compressor. low, resonant, brooding. One could almost picture the chest within rising and falling, not from fear, but from restraint. A woman in the front row shivered. She pulled her scarf higher, not from cold, but from instinct, the primal instinct of a lesser creature sensing something that would not accept a lower place on the food chain. Chief Raincrow gave no signal, but the man wheeling the crate, thin, avoiding all eyes, lowered his head and grasped the tarp. And then the cover was slowly pulled back. The black shape inside stirred. Not like a predator lunging, not like a trained dog awaiting command, but like a heavy mass, roused from a sleep stitched with fury, uncertain if it would open its eyes. No name was called, no paperwork presented, no serial number, no summary of history. Only one word was spoken. Not a name, but an identity. Riven. The sound sliced the air in half, like a dull blade cracking through glass. A second later, as lamplight caught Riven's form, the crowd drew back, just slightly. No screams, no scrambling. But shoulders tensed, eyes widened, and breaths locked behind ribs. Riven stood. Every motion, even the smallest, tightened the air like a bow pulled to breaking. He didn't leap like an excited dog. He rose, slow, deliberate, with a kind of stalking tension, as if he knew exactly how much damage each joint could inflict. His back reached the waist of the nearest man. His shoulders were broad, thick with muscle. His bones showed beneath rippling sinew. His coat was pitch black, not glossy, but dry and matte, like ash caked over slow-burning coal. His neck turned slowly. His eyes swept the crowd, not locking onto anyone, but anyone he glanced at felt scanned, measured by something ancient and precise. Those eyes, copper-toned, didn't gleam, didn't dull. They didn't look like a dog's. They looked like burned steel, melted once in fire, hardened again with memories no one could decipher. And then they saw it. A patch at his neck, where the fur had never grown back, a white, bare stripe, an old scar, a horizontal line, rough-edged, not just scraped skin but a patch where fur would never grow again, as if the flesh had once been torn, or cinched too tightly by a loop of something that stole the blood away. A little boy standing beside his mother clutched her hand and whispered, "Why does it look peeled like that?" The mother gave no reply. The auction fell into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of waiting, but of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that none of them knew what to do with the creature before them. No one stepped forward. No one knelt. No applause. No whistles. Only a stretch of emptiness between Riven and the world. One no one dared to cross. Then suddenly, Riven growled. It wasn't a bark, it was a growl, from the gut, through the throat, spilling out past the canines like a sound without language, one that could only be felt in the spine. The nearest man froze. Eyes wide, Riven lunged, not to strike, not to reach, but enough to rattle the entire cage. The shriek of metal tore the air. A man in a military jacket stepped back 3 paces. His duffel dropped with a soft but echoing thud. Raincrow said nothing. He didn't intervene. He only lowered his head, as if mourning something invisible. And Riven turned away. Not out of boredom, not out of mercy, but as if the one who had just walked off wasn't worthy enough to be growled at a second time. Everyone left. Everyone had been torn by the distance between comfort and intrusion. As the sun disappeared behind the ridgeline, the field sank into the dim, golden hue of oil lamps hung along the fence. Chief Raincrow crossed his arms. The wind lifted the hem of his robe, rustling in quiet waves. "Riven hasn't chosen anyone," he said softly, as if speaking more to the spirits than to the living. Perhaps he's still waiting for someone who won't walk away. And then, from the far end of the circle, behind the thinning crowd, a small, slender figure began walking forward. Slow, unshaken, unafraid. She carried no number, spoke no words. She stepped to the very edge of the circle, where the light of the white pine still touched the earth. The soil beneath her feet held a shallow dip, as if someone had once stood there a very long time ago. The wind threaded through her hair, lifting the hem of her ash-gray cloak to reveal muddied boots. Not the shoes of a visitor, but those of someone who had walked for days without leaving the land. She didn't call his name. She didn't sit. She didn't look at Riven. She simply stood. Close enough for Riven to see her. Far enough not to cross the line. Chief Raincrow glanced her way. No nod, no warning. The wind changed direction. Riven lowered himself, not to growl, but not to retreat either. He simply watched, as if his body, trained for years to react, couldn't decide whether this moment called for rage or restraint. In her hands was an old handkerchief, its brown color faded like earth left under sun. A single stitch embroidered one corner, a swirling spiral, like a coiled wind sewn in pale, frayed thread. She held it gently, not as an offering, but as a memory. No one recognized her. No one knew where she came from. No one from the village greeted her. She shook no hands, made no bows, asked no permission. And yet, no one thought her rude. It was as if she had belonged to this place long before the auction began. Raincrow murmured, barely audible, as if to the wind itself. "Maybe. It's time to tell a story, one that doesn't begin with a growl." Selene stood there. She did nothing to attract Riven's attention. No hand held out, no soothing voice, no crouched posture, no gesture. She did not invite trust. She did not seek it. She simply stood. A middle-aged woman nearby whispered, "What is she doing?" The man beside her replied softly, "Maybe. She's lost." "No," the woman said under her breath. "She's staring right at the circle, but not at the dog." Riven didn't look away. He didn't growl. He didn't lower his head. His body stayed tense, like a bow pulled taut, not yet loosed. But clearly, the small shape before him did not provoke him like the others had. She didn't feel like a threat, or a handler, or anything else. She was just a fixed point amidst a season-shifting wind. Selene remained. She didn't wave, didn't move her arms, didn't call out, didn't toss meat or jingle bells or flash any of the signals handlers used to tame or tempt. She made no effort to draw Riven in, did not bend low, did not soften her voice, did not kneel to imitate safety, did not hold a leash, ready to snap something wild into submission. She did not invite trust. Nothing in her posture begged, nothing hoped to be chosen. She just stood. Her slender form blended into the cold sky of Sage Hollow like a wordless melody. Lamplight from the hilltop caught her tousled brown hair, casting soft shadow across a face that showed no delight, no fear, no swelling triumph. Nothing like those who had tried to conquer Riven before. Her eyes were open, but not wide. Looking into the circle, but not at Riven, as if she were seeing through the layers of air, of threat, of violence, to something that hadn't yet been named. The same middle-aged woman whispered again, "What is she doing?" The man beside her, likely a former trainer, replied hesitantly, "Maybe. She's just lost." The woman scoffed gently. "No." She's staring into the circle, but not at the dog. They both fell silent, as if they'd just spoken something that even they didn't quite understand. Riven didn't look away. His stance didn't shift. That posture, like a fractured stone waiting for one last rainstorm to finally split it apart, was taut, compressed. Ears up, eyes unblinking, back foot still braced, but unmoving, not even an inch. No growl, no customary step back, the one he always used when refusing someone. But no approach either. Just watching. Intense, but not defensive. The most chilling thing wasn't his ferocity. It was the moment a creature, wired to defend, chose not to react. He had once roared when the first man approached, had slammed the bars when a woman tried to tempt him with food, had curled inward when a boy whistled at him. He had responded to everything, with growls, with stares, with unrelenting silence. But now, facing this girl, he did nothing. Not because she felt safe, not because she had succeeded, but because he hadn't yet decided what she was. She wasn't a challenger. She wasn't a tamer. She wasn't like anyone else. She was just an anchor. A pause that didn't ask the wind to stop. Just existed within it, letting it blow, without resisting, without trying to control. The longer it lasted, the harder it was for the crowd to bear. Not out of fear, but because they couldn't make sense of it. A soft cough. Shuffling feet. A group of young trainees whispering behind her. A man in camo squinted. What does she think she's doing? Another nasal voice, barely suppressing laughter. No auction sign, no leash. What's she gonna use, a handkerchief? The laughter dropped like grains of sand into silence. Not loud, but sharp. Clear. An old woman shook her head. Another dreamer. Chief Raincrow didn't react, didn't glance over, didn't gesture for silence, didn't scold. He just stood there, one hand resting on his cane, the other tucked behind his back, eyes on the horizon. He looked like a man listening to the wind instead of the people. The white pine behind him didn't sway, didn't shiver, just stood. Like him. Not the tallest, not the most majestic, but the first to feel the season changing. The crowd didn't. The wind made them shiver, made them raise their collars, shift their weight. But none stood like him. None stood like the girl. And none stood like the dog inside that cage. Riven stayed as he was, back straight, all 4 feet rooted in the earth, eyes locked on every movement ahead. Some still hadn't given up. The first to step forward was a young man in standard handler uniform. Silver-gray nylon jacket, harness strap across the chest, small pouch on his right hip for rewards, neatly coiled leather leash on the left. He walked out with just enough confidence to steady himself, to impress the crowd, to avoid making Raincrow frown. "Sit down, boy," he said, calm and firm. "Sit." Riven didn't move. The man adjusted his posture, took half a step back, then crouched, placed a food pouch on the ground, opened it with one hand, leash ready in the other. "Smell this. Smoked venison. Premium cut." No response. He tossed the first piece into the cage, precisely 1 handspan from Riven's nose. A snarl cracked out, sudden, sharp, like steel slamming a cathedral bell. The meat never touched the ground. Riven's paw struck it mid-air, sending it tumbling back. The crowd flinched. The man didn't step back, but his face paled. Riven lunged forward, whole body crashing into the bars, forelegs raised, teeth bared to the gum, growl like a grinder ripping tiles from stone. The man stepped back. 1, 2, 3 paces. Lips pressed tight. Hand tightened on the leash, then dropped. He nodded to Raincrow and left the circle without a word. Riven turned away, eyes now on the white pine, back still straight, as if he had tested one and found him unworthy. Next came a woman, older, perhaps a vet. She moved slowly, gently. In her hand, a faded tennis ball, still carrying the scent of dirt. "I have no command," she said softly, "but I know how to play." She sat, placed the ball on the ground. No roll, no toss, just placed. Then pulled her hand away. "Just once, if you want to." Riven tilted his head, eyes narrowed. His body sank slightly, like a signal of readiness. She smiled. "See, no one's forcing anything." The second growl came faster, shorter, snapping like a whip. Riven pressed against the bars, teeth almost closed, tension pulsing. His eyes gleamed, not with rage, but with calculation. She'd said no pressure, but still expected a response. He caught that. She drew back, fingers tightening slightly on the ball. Not out of reluctance, but because she understood. He didn't need someone teaching freedom with strings attached. She nodded and left. Riven looked away. Then came the third. A young man with full-sleeve tattoos, wearing a digital training band, military unit ID on his wrist. "Don't play with me," he said. "I've broken in 3 K9 mission-level handlers." He extended his hand. No food, just command. "Lie down, down." Riven didn't growl. He simply stretched upward, neck tense, eyes locked forward, unblinking. No sound. But the air tightened, suffocating, like someone spotting an exposed wire just above a flooded floor and knowing one more step could kill them. "Listen, boy!" A growl broke, layered, surging. Riven sprang up on all fours. Though barred in, he thrust his neck as far forward as possible. Spit flew from his canines, foam mixed with blood, as if his throat couldn't bear to keep screaming something no one cared to understand. The soldier reached into his back pocket and drew a tranquilizer gun. The crowd gasped. Chief Raincrow didn't move. Riven stopped growling, a strange silence, as if he'd seen this before, and the last time his comrade hadn't woken up after the shot. He stepped back, but didn't turn away, didn't lower his head. The soldier hesitated, then put the gun away. He left, no words, no goodbye, no apology. Riven watched him go and turned away. One by one, they came. The first after Riven's snarl was a young man in a crisp handler's jacket, face freshly shaved, movements sharp, posture confident. A technician. He brought no treats, no toys, just a commanding voice, precision in his breath, and the skills of someone who had stood before dozens, maybe hundreds, of more difficult dogs. He entered with a steady nod. Didn't bow too low, but carried no arrogance either. Stopped at a safe distance, his stance textbook perfect, firm but flexible. "Sit," he ordered. Not loud, not rushed. Riven watched. No response. The man changed tone, added hand signals, raised 2 fingers, then lowered them slowly, repeated the command. "Sit." Riven still watched, not with fear, not quite defiance either, but as if saying, "Don't you see what's wrong here?" Then a low growl, not loud, but enough to make the air shift in the cage. Riven didn't lunge, just lowered his center of gravity, eyes narrowing. The trainer bit his lip, stepped back. Once, then again. Riven turned away. Not in triumph, but as if making a note. Well-trained, but only speaks. Doesn't listen. Next came a woman of age. Silver hair tied back neatly, a wool scarf around her shoulders embroidered with a dog's face. One with compassion. She gave no commands, just soft eyes and a whispering voice like a lullaby. "Sweetheart, no one will hurt you again." She didn't move closer. But from her pocket, she pulled a scrap of cloth, maybe an old shirt from her own dog, and placed it on the ground. Riven stretched forward and sniffed. She smiled. A smile filled with warmth, but not free of hope. She stepped back, softly repeating, "That's it. Good boy." Riven growled. But this time it was different. Not fierce, not loud, but mournful, like the gentlest refusal and the deepest despair. Because he didn't need pity. He needed to be seen as something that had never surrendered. The woman stepped away, wiped her eyes, said nothing more. Riven turned away. The one with experience followed, an old man who'd run a search and rescue dog center for 23 years. He walked in holding a worn leather notebook, took notes, observed. He didn't speak, just made hand signals once used for injured wolves. Once, twice, 3 times. Riven didn't react. The man wrote something down, tried a blinking reflex test. Riven didn't blink. Then, Riven lowered his head. Not in submission, but as if he'd turned everything off. For a moment, it was as if he vanished, though his body remained. The old man lowered his pen, he sighed, and walked out of the circle. Riven turned away. The one with power entered like he owned the whole auction ground. Black suit, purple tie, a metal wristband engraved with the logo of an international security firm. He didn't speak, just snapped his fingers. Behind him, someone brought out a gold-trimmed cage, a collar that shimmered in the light. He looked at Riven like property, not with disdain, but desire. "This one's got looks," he said. "Give it a few weeks of retraining." He reached into his pocket. A small device, high-frequency whistle, the kind used to rewire neural responses. Riven didn't growl. He took one step, just one. And his eyes, they no longer reacted. They were fire, pure fire. The man stopped snapping. Not out of fear, but because he'd been seen through. In that moment, he knew, if anything remained in this creature, it could not be bought. He backed away. No words, no scowl, no bow. Riven turned away. The last to step in was someone who came to give. A young woman, dyed red hair, arms wrapped around a plush toy dog, clearly someone who had once loved an animal deeply. She approached with trembling emotion. "Let me make it right. For what they did to you." She sat down, placed the stuffed toy on the ground, called his name. Not wrongly, not theatrically, just whispered, "I won't leave you, I promise." A growl slipped out, not loud, not long, but cold. She froze, fought back tears, then turned away. Riven turned away. One by one, with everything, skill, compassion, discipline, money, promises, they all stepped forward. They were all turned away. Not because Riven was too difficult, not because he was useless, not because he couldn't be saved, but because he was testing them, not with tricks, not with defiance, with only one method, the growl and the turning away. As if Riven was asking each one, not with words, but with his presence. If I don't obey, if I don't eat, if I don't look, if I don't stop growling, will you still stay? No one stayed. They didn't fail. They simply didn't pass a test they never realized was happening. And then the wind shifted. Not cold wind, not storm wind, but the kind that comes with changing seasons, when the forest stops howling and only whispers lullabies. Solene was still there. No commands, no movement, nothing at all. But he didn't growl, and he didn't turn away. He looked, longer than he had looked at anyone. She didn't believe she was better than those who came before. She didn't think she was more worthy. She wasn't more skilled. She didn't love animals more than anyone else, but she stayed. She didn't try to coax him. She didn't try to make him feel better. She just remained, without being welcomed, without being answered, without being growled for. Chief Raincrow turned toward the white pine. He looked up at its highest branch, where it slowly swayed in the wind. Then he whispered, to no one in particular, maybe the real trial isn't to choose who is skilled enough, but to find out who stays, even when they're not invited. And then Solene took a step. Slow, not timid, not assertive. Just one step, then another, like someone walking through shallow water without knowing where the sharp rocks lay. Within that radius, every person who had stepped before had been driven back by the sound of a snarl. Each one had flinched. Each one had been pushed away. She did not stop, but she didn't rush either. She let each footfall ask Riven for permission. She didn't speak, didn't try to persuade with her gaze, didn't blink in the hopeful way meant to soften things. She just remained, little by little, within a space no one had held for more than 5 seconds. Riven raised his head. His ears perked, drawing every bit of air into a stance as sharp as it could be. His body coiled like a spring wound too tight. One wrong look, and it would snap. His neck strained like a string stretched past pitch, tense, choked, ready to tear. But he didn't leap. He held his breath, and then a growl broke free, this time, unlike all the others. It wasn't the deep rumble of fear, not the reflexive snap, not the warning bark for those too fast, too thoughtless. This growl was a strike, a shove made of breath, fierce, sharp, cold, unforgiving. It wasn't just a sound. It was his entire body releasing pressure, as if blood, muscle, fur, and bone vibrated into one primal warning from a creature cornered too many times. It echoed like thunder in a cavern, bounced off stone walls, then roared back into the world. It scraped through his throat like metal dragged across stone. Not because he wanted to attack, but because he couldn't bear what he didn't understand. The crowd recoiled almost in unison. A child behind them burst into tears, though he wasn't even seen. A middle-aged man dropped his drink, face blanching. A couple stepped back 3 paces, hands clutched tight, eyes glued to the cage. A woman whispered, "My God, that's not a dog's growl. It's like something that burned and came back." The wind turned back on itself. It kicked up a faint trail of gray dust. Leaves spiraled at the edge of the circle, oil lamps swung on wires, their lights tilting. And Solene stood still, no closing her eyes, no flinching, no turning away, no hands shielding chest or ears. She stayed. She didn't challenge, didn't soothe, didn't turn to anyone for comfort. She did nothing, only her eyes wide, not from fear, but clarity. What just tried to push me away? What is it? Is it an animal? Is it instinct? Or is it a wound that hasn't yet found a language? Riven growled a second time. No waiting. A growl like a hammer blow, a growl that warned, a growl that screamed, "I told you, stay away!" This one was uneven. It cracked midway, as if his throat had been scorched, as if that roar was the last thing he had left to guard the final patch of ground inside himself. The crowd backed further. A woman screamed, "Get her out! He's going to jump!" Another shouted, "Call the team! Tranquilize him!" A young man, panicked, grabbed Chief Raincrow's sleeve. "If you let him keep growling like that, he'll—" Raincrow did not turn, did not speak. He stood, silent like a spine among trembling shadows. And Solène still stood. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't reach forward to do anything at all. As if she had just accepted the growl. Not because she was brave, not because she was strong, but because she didn't believe the growl was meant for her. The third time, there was no growl, only silence, but not the silence of peace, not the calm before the storm. This was silence caught in the throat. The silence of a creature who had growled itself hoarse, clawed itself raw, smashed into bars until its body ached. And still no one understood. Riven looked at her. No movement, no bowing, no blinking. Only breathing, each breath deep, heavy, dry as ash. He still didn't believe. Didn't believe that after 3 growls, someone could still be standing there, not flinching, not forcing a smile, not scrambling to fix things, not running, simply still there. A gust of wind slipped through a gap between 2 trees. Riven's fur stirred slightly. The scent of sweat. The scent of earth. The scent of a human. But no scent of fear. The crowd held their breath. No one dared to speak. No one dared to interfere. No one had the courage to wonder what they were even supposed to say in a moment like this. Because everyone understood. They had no place in this growl, only her and him, and something unnamed, shifting ever so slightly between a creature once choked by wire and a girl holding a handkerchief embroidered with wind. Riven didn't step forward, nor did he turn away. He sat, front legs folding, eyes still fixed on her, not in surrender, not in acceptance, but because he couldn't believe. Couldn't believe that after 3 growls, someone was still there, not panicking, not waving hands, not saying, "I understand," not saying, "I won't hurt you," just not leaving. A bird flapped somewhere overhead. A whisper rustled at the edge of the forest, and the arena held its breath. Solène slowly sat down. She didn't inch closer, didn't close the distance. She simply lowered herself, as if to say, "I am not above, I am not below, I am here. If you want, you can see me." In that moment, no one recorded. No one laughed, no one clapped, no one shouted, "Amazing!" But every eye welled with tears, not from victory, but because, for the first time in all the years of Sage Hollow, a creature didn't need to be saved, didn't need to be tamed, only needed someone who wouldn't walk away. Chief Raincrow pulled a black crow feather from inside his coat. He pressed it into the ground, between Solène and Riven. No one understood why. But he whispered, as if speaking to old spirits, "From this day on, this place is marked, the place where a growl, for the first time, didn't mean the end." The sky deepened into bronze. The last light of day withdrew to the distant hills, leaving the arena dimmer, deeper, like an old well whose lid had just been lifted. The wind changed course, no longer sweeping sideways. Now it spiraled, weaving through the cracks between people and shadows. It carried the smell of rotting wood, moss on stone, and something older, the breath of spirits who had once lived here. The crowd began to disperse. No voice declared the auction closed. No one urged others to leave. Because even they didn't know if this was still an auction anymore. Some looked back, eyes holding something that could not be named. Some lowered their heads and walked quickly, as if afraid they had just witnessed something they weren't meant to see. Only the wind slipped through the spaces in their thoughts, chilling their shoulders, though sunlight still lingered. Selene did not leave. She still sat there. Not pressing forward, not falling back, not close enough to touch, not far enough to make Riven strain to watch. She simply was there. As if this exact place, the edge between distance and trust, was the only place that truly existed. Riven remained still, his body unmoving. But his gaze had changed. No longer flames that burned to keep everyone away, no longer jagged stone ready to collapse, only weariness. A weariness not born of the body, not from hunger, not from fatigue, but from growling for far too long, in a world that never understood his language. Chief Raincrow stepped forward, slowly, as if each step were a small funeral rite for things long lost. He did not get too close. He stood beside a low stone, behind Selene. Then he sat. No rush, as if sitting beside a grave. "Do you see," he spoke, voice low, "the bare patch of fur around his neck?" Selene nodded gently. Her eyes never left Riven. "I saw it, from the beginning." "It's not illness," Raincrow said. "It's not a deformity. It's a mark left by a tightening." The wind shifted his cloak to one side, revealing a faint scar at his neck. Circular, faint, small, but unmistakable to anyone who had ever served in uniform, especially those who knew what kind of training never made it into official documents. "The training camp he was taken to had no name," he said. "We called it Blindstone. Because no one knew where the orders came from, and no one left with eyes that still saw justice." "You know," he continued, slower now, eyes still not meeting Riven's, as if afraid he'd see an old version of himself. "Many have seen that patch, that bare spot around his neck. They look once and turn away. They think it's a sign of danger, of violence, of madness in the animal. But no one asks, where did the wire come from? Who pulled it tight? And why hasn't the fur grown back?" Riven still lay there, not growling, not bowing, but his eyes were half closed, like someone who listens but isn't sure they have the right to speak. "That bare spot," Raincrow said, "wasn't caused by a beating. It came from the training, the kind designed for creatures not allowed to say no. That steel wire, it wasn't removed until the animal reacted correctly. Didn't eat? Tighten it more. Didn't lie down? Tighten again. Didn't growl? Tighten even more." The wind swept along the white pine. A few birds flew past the ridge, leaving no sound behind. "Riven was once a war dog," he said. "Code Viex 16. No name, no handler of his own, no play, only judged by one metric, neutralization efficiency." His voice now wasn't just narration. It was confession. "I was once the one who read the reports on Riven. I was the one who wrote stubborn behavior in the final column. I was the one who signed the form that said, this animal is no longer compatible with operational environments." Selene listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't do what others often mistook for empathy. She simply opened a space for the truth to pour out and seep into the earth like holy water at the end of a long day of penance. "During one session," Raincrow continued, "they noted that Riven did not react correctly to the whistle cue. They increased the voltage, switched to a larger collar, tightened the wire until the flesh swelled, then tore. But Riven didn't howl, didn't whimper, he only growled. And that was the first time I saw a growl that wasn't meant to threaten. It was to hold on to the last piece of dignity, in a world that only valued obedience. Selene looked at Riven. He didn't respond, but his eyes opened, slowly, just enough to meet hers, without turning away. "No one asks why the fur never grew back," Raincrow repeated. "They only fear it. They only avoid it. But the fur didn't stay gone because the skin died. It stayed gone because that spot had once been where life was controlled, and Riven, somehow, refused to let it be erased." A stronger gust swept through, rustling the dry grass. The black crow feather planted earlier leaned toward Selene. She looked at it. Didn't touch. Just gently shifted her body, shielding it from the rising wind. A scar no one dared to touch. A feather no one had thought sacred. But once it was protected not out of purpose but from recognizing what it had endured, it began to mean something else. Selene didn't ask. She only listened. By not interrupting, she allowed the truth to unfold, like melting ice. The operation failed, no reinforcements, left behind, communication cut. No one came for the first 5 days. Raincrow's voice wasn't low anymore. It had grown thinner, like it was slipping from reality, returning to a memory no one wished to name. Everyone thought the unit had perished, but on the 6th day, a rescue team found... He paused. Riven was still there, sitting beside the body of one of the 3 soldiers. That soldier's name was Mason Kerr. No glowing commendations, not a commander, not a legend, just a young serviceman devoted to the K9 unit from the start. And in Mason's team, Riven was the only one never called Dog. Mason called him the Watcher. That day, on the northern border, there was nothing but rock and wind. Mist hung like funeral cloth, blanketing vision until no one could tell if they were surviving or already ghosts. When gunfire rang out along the mountain slope, the squad split on emergency orders. Mason took a bullet to the abdomen, blood pouring fast enough he knew he wouldn't make it. He didn't cry out, just gripped the leash looped around Riven's neck and signaled, "Do not leave your post." Riven understood, not through words, but through something deeper than sound, something only formed between souls bound not by commands, but by trust. Then Mason unfastened the leash, not to free, not from pain, but to return agency. "From now on, you are no longer held." But Riven didn't leave. For the next 5 days, in bone-deep cold, with wind slashing through the canyons like claws, Riven sat beside Mason. He didn't bark, didn't howl, didn't ask for food, didn't walk away. On the first day, the wind carried salt dust from the frozen lake at the hill's base, stinging his eyes. On the second, snow began to fall, soft as ash, covering his numbed legs. On the third, old wounds reopened. The bare patch on his neck cracked and bled, for there was no one to apply balm, no shelter, no command for rest. On the fourth, the growl wouldn't come, his throat dry as parched soil, and by the fifth, his breath was heavy as lead, but his eyes didn't blink when footsteps approached. The rescue team first thought he was neurologically damaged. A living creature, next to the dead, not moving, not reacting, not afraid, not believing. As they drew near, Riven growled, not to protect the dead, but to guard the only thing still unbroken, loyalty not yet torn apart. They tried food, didn't work. Tried calling his name, didn't work. Finally, someone in the team remembered. Mason had once given his jacket to a local nurse, kept as a keepsake. The jacket was brought back, placed a few steps from the body. Riven leaned forward, sniffed. Then, for the first time in 5 days, He stepped beyond the boundary of loss. Not fully, just shifted. He lay down beside the jacket and stopped growling. The name Riven, in the old tongue, means the one who has been torn. No one knows what the first person who gave him that name was thinking, but after the border campaign, everyone understood. He had been torn, not by bullets, but by silence. Chief Raincrow told it all, voice steady like a prayer. Not to excuse Riven, not to pity him, but so that the one before him would understand. There are wounds no eye can see. They thought he was broken, he said, labeled him behaviorally defective, sent him into isolation, stamped him no longer responsive to training. But I knew, it's not that he couldn't hear, it's that he no longer believed there was anything worth hearing. That collar around his neck, Raincrow breathed out, was the last thing Mason removed when he knew he wouldn't survive. And you know something? His voice dropped beneath the wind. It wasn't removed to ease the weight. It was so Riven would know. From now on, no one holds you back anymore. Solène remained silent. Didn't ask, didn't comfort, didn't deny. She only placed her hand gently on the ground, where the grass brushed against Riven's coarse fur. Riven didn't pull away, didn't turn, just tilted his head. One ear drooped slightly, as if it had heard a sound it once knew. Riven didn't need someone to hold him back, didn't need someone to drag him forward. He only needed to know that if someone walked beside him, they wouldn't leave, whether he growled or stayed silent. Solène didn't draw a card, didn't place a bid, didn't stand among the applicants for training, adoption, or interaction with promising animals. She simply came. Every day, just as the sun struggled to pierce through the early mist over Sage Hollow, Solène was already there. No one called her name. No one mentioned her in the morning chatter, because she didn't make trouble. And she didn't give any signal that she wanted to be remembered. She simply sat. Each day, a little closer. Not close enough to invade, not far enough to be an irrelevant observer. Just within the range where her breath could reach, without making Riven brace himself all over again. And she breathed. Not deeply, not with deliberate calm, not with any meditative technique. Just breathed, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. At first, the people at the camp thought she was building rapport through reverse psychology. Someone whispered, "New trick? How long does a dog last before giving in if you just sit there?" Another chuckled. "She thinks she's the wind? No touch, no command, and the beast will remember her face?" But Solène didn't reply, didn't react, didn't adjust her behavior to meet their opinions. She simply kept sitting. On the third day, a curious child crawled toward where she was seated. Parents gasped. Riven leapt up, growling, eyes blazing. Solène didn't turn. She simply reached one hand behind her, gently stopping the child, and said, "He's not threatening you. He just wants to know if you'll run." On the fifth day, it rained. Still she came. No umbrella, no hooded coat, only an old handkerchief wrapped around her neck, its edges frayed, but the embroidered spiral still intact. She sat in the rain, and Riven didn't growl. He watched for a long while, then turned his face away. But not his back. That was the first sign. Not a wag. Not a bowed head. Just a quiet permission. If you need to be there, stay. I won't push you away, but I haven't invited you in. Chief Raincrow witnessed it all, from the upstairs balcony, from beneath the white pine. He didn't take notes, didn't report to the board, didn't call a meeting. He simply placed a small stone on the edge of the dirt ring where Solène often sat. A silent marker. To say, "Here, something is shifting." On the 10th day, Solène opened her eyes and found Riven watching her. No snarl, no shrinking, just looking, then turning away again. Not in avoidance, just enough. Enough to know you're not pretending. Enough to see you're not seeking a reward. Enough to believe, when I no longer have the strength to growl, you'll still be here. Solène didn't call out his name, didn't ask, "Are you hungry?" Didn't extend her hand. She didn't try to connect. Because she understood, what Riven needed wasn't connection. He needed someone calm enough that he didn't have to be on guard. One morning, a silver mist clung to the pine trunks. Solène arrived as usual. Sat, breathed. Eyes half closed. Riven didn't growl. He stood at a distance, head tilted slightly. Didn't approach, didn't retreat, just watched. Then turned his face away, but not his back. And in that fleeting moment between wind, silence, and silver light, something like permission to exist rose within them both. Solène didn't smile, didn't say a word. But for the first time, she took out a small folded note from her coat pocket, written in soft handwriting. "I didn't come to ask permission to take you away. I just want to stay until the day you feel there's no need to growl anymore." She didn't hand it to Riven, just placed it on the ground, between them. The wind rolled the paper once, then it stopped beside the stone Raincrow had once set down. One circle, one mark, one message, without a voice. Solène didn't draw a card, didn't place a bid, didn't line up to apply for training, adoption, or animal rehabilitation. She simply came, every day, just as the sun struggled to pierce the morning fog above Sage Hollow. Solène was already there. No one called her name. No one brought her up in morning briefings, because she caused no trouble, gave no sign of wanting to be remembered. She simply sat, each day a little closer, not close enough to be intrusive, not far enough to fade into irrelevance, just within the distance where her breath might reach, without making Riven brace again. And she breathed, not deeply, not lightly on purpose, not with any practiced technique. Just breathed, as if her presence was the most ordinary thing on earth. On the first day, they thought she was a new volunteer. On the second, they watched with skepticism. By the third, whispers began. "Is this a new method? How long until the dog breaks down? She thinks she's the wind? Touch nothing, say nothing, and hope the beast remembers?" Each step Solène took, not toward Riven, but toward not retreating, became an excuse for the crowd to twist what they didn't understand. On the fourth day, a middle-aged trainer shook his head and muttered, "What are you doing here, sweetheart? That's a war dog, not some pup needing comfort." Another woman added, "Look at its neck, still red. Do you know what animals like that have done to their handlers?" A man with a gold badge on his chest, a sponsor, laughed loudly. "She's got no price sheet, no access request. Thinks she's got healing energy or something." Solène heard. Every word, every breath warped by arrogance, pretending to be concern. But she didn't answer, didn't react, didn't change. She simply continued to sit, as if her language came not from her mouth, but from her willingness to stay. On the fifth day, it rained. She still came. No umbrella, no cloak. Just the same old handkerchief wrapped around her neck, its edges frayed, but the hand-stitched spiral still intact. Riven didn't growl. He looked for a long time, then turned his face away, but not his back. A woman standing near Raincrow whispered, "He didn't growl. For the first time in 6 months. He didn't answer. He only reached down, picked up a small, flat stone, and placed it at the edge of the circle where Solène always sat. No one understood. No one asked. But from that day on, people in the camp began to whisper more softly. Still, there were those who hadn't learned silence. On the 7th day, a group of young trainees giggled as Solène appeared. Back again? Is she writing a love diary to a dog or something? If that beast shows a reaction, I'll eat my ID badge. Solène passed them, light as a leaf that doesn't want to stir the dust. She went to her familiar spot. Sat down. Didn't unwrap the scarf. Didn't say a word. And Riven, for the first time, didn't watch her. But he didn't close his eyes either. He just breathed. Longer. Slower. Not like a guard, but as if he had begun to remember the rhythm of someone breathing beside him. Chief Raincrow watched from the small balcony. In his hand, a dry pine twig. The wind blew, a needle fell to the ground. He didn't pick it up, didn't take notes, just quietly watched the stone he had set, where now the shade stretched farther. Here, he whispered, something is changing. And it hadn't come with commands, hadn't come with food, hadn't come with leashes or stroking hands. It came through return, day after day, from someone who had nothing to prove. On the 10th morning, white mist hung thick as silk, spilling from the forest's crest to the edge of the arena. The white pine in the distance faded into a blur, like a tower in an ink painting. The entire space seemed compressed, only wind slipping through cracks in the earth and stone. Solène walked slowly, unhurried, not in a straight line. She walked as if testing each current, letting the wind lead her. When she reached the edge of the familiar circle, where Raincrow's stone still sat untouched, she paused. Didn't sit. Just stood there, hands holding the edge of her coat, eyes closed, chin slightly raised, as if listening for a melody that hadn't begun. Then, footsteps. Not loud, not soft, just clear enough to know it wasn't the wind. Riven. He stepped out from the shadows, the place that had always been his domain. A place no one had dared to cross. A place from which he had never voluntarily moved. He didn't run, didn't drag his feet, didn't act like he needed anything. He simply shifted, step by step, toward the stone. Solène didn't move. She didn't want to shatter the moment forming. Like a freezing lake, stunning, but fragile enough that a single misstep in breath could break the whole surface. Riven stopped. 3 steps from the stone. He sniffed, not close to the ground, just a subtle tilt of his nose, a small head turn, a quiet exhale. Then he sat. Not because of a command, not because of a reward, just because he wanted to. For the first time, Solène saw Riven's shoulders not pulled taut like a drawn bow, not braced to fight, and not collapsed in surrender. Just at rest, a creature in a space where it wasn't being hunted. She slowly sat down. 2 breaths from the stone. Didn't look directly at Riven. Just breathed like every morning before. Riven glanced at her. Not for long, not too brief. Just long enough for something unspoken to settle in. Then turned his face, but not his back. And in that stillness, as flat and silent as water, where no one spoke, where even the wind seemed to pause, Solène drew a folded slip of paper from her pocket. Written by hand, in soft strokes, she held it in her palm, reading silently before folding it again. I didn't come to ask to take you away. I only want to stay, until the day you feel there's no need to growl anymore. She didn't hand it to Riven, didn't call, didn't coax, just placed it on the ground, between them. A message without a voice. The wind stirred. The note rolled once, as if brushing every breath rooted around the stone. Then came to rest, right beside the spot where Riven had set his paw. He didn't react right away. Just looked at it, as if it weren't paper, but a different kind of language. No sound, no command, no dominance, only presence. Someone nearby whispered. She made him come out, no leash. Another shook their head. He didn't come out. He made space. Chief Raincrow stood beneath the white pine's shade. In his hand, an old earth-toned scarf, worn at the edges. No one knew where he got it. But when he draped it over his shoulders, no one asked. Because he was looking at the two seated figures, one human, one canine, not confronting, but not retreating, not tethered, but not letting go. And he whispered, to no one in particular. One circle, one mark, one message without a voice. A few in the crowd remained, some out of curiosity, some from duty, some simply unsure when to leave, and some not really knowing why they stayed, only that something held them still. All were silent. No bidding, no gavel, no board listing adopted or pending evaluation. Only eyes drawn to the small stone, where two souls sat side by side, not a person and a dog, but two beings sharing silence as if it were a contract. Chief Raincrow stepped forward. He didn't move between them, didn't interrupt the thread just beginning to weave. He walked around, as slowly as if the ground itself had once been cursed, and he had to ask permission for each step. He stopped at Solenne's side. Morning light slanted through the pine branches, casting a thin silver sheen across her hair. She didn't turn her head, just gave a slight nod, as if she had heard him arrive before his footsteps touched the ground. He sat down, an arm's length away, didn't look at her, only looked at Riven. Riven didn't growl, didn't snarl, didn't retreat. He looked back and blinked. You didn't place a bid, Raincrow said, voice calm as water without ripples. Solenne shook her head. No. A long silence followed. Not cold, not tense, just the kind of space waiting to be filled with something truer than words. Then he spoke again. This time, voice soft, like he was speaking to a little girl he'd once known, long ago, in some far-off place. If you're not buying him, what do you call him? The question landed like a leaf touching a lake. No splash, but everything shifted. Solenne turned her head. For the first time, she looked directly at Chief Raincrow. Her eyes didn't brighten, didn't darken. They only deepened, as if every word she was about to say had been steeped a long time, like tea in an old clay pot that never needs to boil twice. And she answered, without hesitation. Riven. Raincrow tilted his head slightly, not to challenge, not to agree. Just to ask, gently, like wind brushing a shoulder. Why keep the old name? You know most people, when they take in a new animal, change the name to start over. Solenne smiled, but not the kind of smile meant for others, the kind meant for a memory that had finally healed. Because I didn't come to start over, she said. I came to continue, from where everyone else left off. The wind shifted. The scarf on Raincrow's shoulder fluttered, then slipped to the ground. He didn't pick it up, just nodded. Once. Solène looked down at the small stone. The name Riven wasn't carved there, but it was there, as if it had always been, just waiting for someone quiet enough to see it. Riven, because he was torn, she said. Torn away from identity, from trust, from reason to live. But I don't need him whole. I only need him alive. Raincrow took a breath, deeper than usual. Didn't exhale right away. Held it in his chest, as if waiting for the wind to return from some forgotten place in his memory. Riven, he echoed. Not to possess, not to command, but to continue living. He stood, didn't use his cane, didn't strain, just rose, like an old tree that knows when to leave its roots behind. Chief Raincrow walked toward the center of the ring, where, years ago, a wooden auction platform had stood. The platform was gone now, but the ground still bore its shape, a sunken patch of earth like a scar no one dared step on. He stopped right there, didn't step forward another inch. He didn't raise a gavel, didn't raise his voice, just spoke one sentence, loud enough to quiet all the wind in the valley. The auction is over, and he has chosen. Silence. No applause, no one asked. How do you know he chose? He didn't sign anything. Does he even understand? Because everyone saw, Riven had chosen, not with a bowed head, not with a lick on the hand, but by not turning away. A child tugged on her mother's hand, looked up, and whispered, "He's sitting next to her, Mom." The mother gave a small nod, as if she too was relearning how to see a creature, not by commands, but by eyes. Solène turned to him. Didn't smile, didn't beam. She simply said, softly, as if repeating what he had always known. "From now on, you are Riven. Not because someone named you, but because you didn't let yourself be erased." Chief Raincrow pulled from his pocket a small wooden sign, painted white, its edges chipped. On it, only 2 words, hand-carved. Riven, chosen. He fixed the sign to the pine post where once hung the names of dogs marked as unadopted. Just beneath it had long rested a large, weathered plank, stained by years of mud. Not yet claimed. He removed it, without a hammer, without help, with his own hands, slowly, as if lifting a curse. Then he walked to a small clay furnace near the base of the tree, once used to burn the files of unrecoverable cases. They called it the Forget-Me Furnace, but today it would remember. Raincrow placed the old board into the flames, lit the fire. Not big, not fierce, just enough to burn slow, so everyone could clearly see. The label "Not Yet Claimed" no longer existed. Then he turned back, stood in the center of the ring, and for the first time that day he began to ask, not to hear answers, but so everyone might hear themselves. Did anyone ever ask why that animal growled? No reply. Did anyone ever ask why he turned his face, but didn't bite? Still silent. Did anyone ever wonder if he remembered anyone at all? A young man bowed his head, for reasons unknown. Did anyone, upon seeing the scar around his neck, ever place a hand on their own heart and ask, if I were held for too long, would I even know how to live free again? No one moved, only the wind, brushing gently through the branches. Chief turned toward Solène. His voice was slow but not sorrowful. And in the end, did anyone dare look into those eyes, not hoping for affection, not hoping for a wag, not hoping for some positive sign, but simply to stay because he deserves to live? An older woman began to cry, not from pity, but because she remembered herself, the part of her that once just wanted to be seen, without having to offer anything back. Raincrow looked around. His gaze didn't linger on anyone too long. But each person he met eyes with felt as if they'd been illuminated or quietly questioned by something ancient. "I used to think auctions were for choosing," he concluded, "but it turns out they're for waiting, for a soul patient enough to ask for nothing, to impose nothing, to need no proof." From then on, no one asked, "How's she going to take him home? No leash." Because Riven had already gone, not with a lead, not with an order, but with a place to sit, and someone who wouldn't walk away. Solen's house sat near the edge of the eastern woods, a small oak loft with a low roof and weathered brown shingles, no fences around it, no alarm bell, no nameplate, no floodlights, only a window that stayed slightly open, and a wooden porch overlooking a slope of soft grass where moonlight could reach without being blocked by anything man-made. Solen made no special preparations, no mattress laid out, no toys bought, no food scattered as a trail, no blanket scented with something familiar. She simply opened the door and waited. Riven came. No call brought him, no leash led him, no one guided the way. He arrived on the morning after the auction, in the gray blur between mist and light. Not fast, not slow, just enough for a creature long withdrawn from all touch to choose a new destination on his own. He stopped at the steps, didn't climb, just stood, far enough to turn back if he needed to, close enough to know someone was waiting, without forcing him. Solen stood in the kitchen, didn't come out, didn't kneel, didn't reach out. She only tilted her head, as if posing a question without words. "If you're here, then this is home." And Riven stepped inside, not following a cue, not drawn by food, not because anyone called, but because he wanted to. He chose a spot near the door, not close to the kitchen, not near the bed, not beside the table. He didn't sprawl like a house dog, didn't curl up like a wounded animal. He lay on his side, eyes open, ears alert, mouth still, but his chest tensed, as if holding a breath caught between two worlds. Solen didn't touch him, didn't approach, didn't place a hand on his head, didn't say, "Good boy, you made it." Because this wasn't redemption. It was permission to go on living. That first night, Riven didn't sleep. He made no sound, didn't pace like a nervous dog, didn't growl, didn't whine. He lay by the door, like a gatekeeper. Not to protect, not because he distrusted Solen, but because he wasn't used to not being under threat. At times, he looked out towards the porch, as if expecting someone to appear from the forest and say, "Game's over, back to the compound." No one came, no one called, no hand seized his neck, no training signal was triggered, only Solen's breathing, soft and steady from across the room. No scratching at the door, no pressure, just unconditional presence. The first morning, when sunlight filtered through the pines, Solen stepped out of her room. She didn't call his name, didn't hold a leash. The door was still open, and Riven was still there. He didn't lick her hand, didn't leap in joy. He just turned his head, glanced, then looked back outside, but didn't leave. The next day, a friend of Solen's visited, an older woman, with a faint scent of perfume. Riven didn't move, but he didn't eat, either, even though the food bowl had been placed nearby. Only after the visitor left and the quiet returned did he eat. Swiftly, but not anxiously. Silently, but without panic. He still carried his old reflexes. At the sound of a speeding car, his body tensed. When someone stood behind him too long, his ears flicked. When darkness filled a corner of the room, he faced it, to guard, not to sleep. Solen didn't correct him, didn't try to change him. didn't say, "It's okay." She simply lived alongside him, as if all those reactions were allowed to exist. One day, when Solène accidentally closed the door a little too hard, Riven, startled, didn't growl, just sprang to his feet, then lay right in front of the door, as if once more he needed to be sure he had the right to hold that exit. He didn't move all night, eyes open, ears upright, back tense. The next morning when Solène opened the door, he was still there. Not as someone left behind, but as someone who chose to stay with every sunrise. Solène left the light on, soft, amber, didn't walk toward the door, didn't study him, didn't crouch or speak like a ritual. She only placed a bowl of water nearby and returned inside. No call, no waiting, no check to see if he drank, as if the act didn't need to be witnessed to be real. The next morning, light streamed through the thin curtain. Not harsh, just a pale layer of morning breath. Solène stepped into the kitchen. The door still closed. The water bowl was half empty. Not spilled, not tipped. Just less, exactly as a careful creature might have used it in silence, and Riven was still there. No leash, no chart, no one keeping him in, no gate closed behind him. Only a choice, repeated every morning, to stay. First week Riven didn't eat if strangers were in the house. Even with Solène, if she moved suddenly or turned her back just right, only then would he dip down, eat quickly, silently, then raise his head again like nothing had happened. Once, an old radio suddenly chimed. Riven snapped to attention, didn't bark, didn't panic, just stared at the sound, as if waiting for a command. But the command never came. Just a weather report. Solène didn't turn it off. She let it play. And next time, Riven didn't rise. Second week, Riven began stepping onto the porch, didn't go far into the yard, didn't run down the grassy slope, just sat at the edge of the wood, where the light could touch his back. Didn't look into the forest, didn't scout for exits. He looked toward Solène, where she sat reading under the pine. Once, Solène looked up, met his gaze. Not long. No clear meaning. But it was a look that knew how to respond. She didn't wave. Didn't call his name. Just bowed her head and resumed reading, as if to say, "I see you, and I ask nothing of that." Third week. One rainy morning, Solène overslept. Didn't open the door at the usual time. She didn't turn around, just nodded slightly, as if she'd sensed his presence before his footsteps sounded. He sat down, an arm's length away, not looking at her, only at Riven. Riven didn't growl, didn't hiss, nor did he retreat. He looked back and blinked. "You didn't place a bid," Raincrow said, his voice as calm as undisturbed water. Solène shook her head. "No." A prolonged silence followed, not cold, not tense, just an emptiness waiting to be filled with something more genuine than words. Then he continued. This time, his voice gentle, as if speaking to a familiar little girl from a distant past. "If you didn't buy him, what do you call him?" The question fell like a leaf touching the surface of a lake, not causing ripples, but changing everything's direction. Solène turned her head. For the first time, she looked directly at Chief Raincrow. Her eyes didn't brighten, nor darken, just deepened, as if each word she was about to say had been steeped for a long time, like tea in an earthen pot that never needed reheating. And she answered, without hesitation. "Riven." Raincrow tilted his head slightly, not to refute, nor to confirm, just asked, lightly, like a breeze brushing past the shoulder. Why keep the old name? You know, many people when adopting a new animal often change its name to start anew. Solène smiled, but not the kind of smile meant for others. Rather, a smile reserved for a memory that has healed. Because I didn't come to start over, she said. I came to continue, from the very place others left off. The wind changed direction. The scarf on Raincrow's shoulder fluttered gently, then fell to the ground on one side. He didn't pick it up, just nodded. Once. Solène looked down at the small stone. There, the name Riven wasn't engraved, but it appeared, as if it had always been there, just waiting for someone calm enough to see it. Riven, because he was torn, she said, because he had been ripped from his identity, his trust, his purpose. But I don't need him to be whole. I just need him to be alive. Raincrow took a slightly deeper breath than usual. Didn't exhale immediately. Held it in his chest, as if waiting for the wind to return from an untidy memory. Riven, he repeated, not to own, not to obey, but to continue living. He stood up, without using a cane, without twisting his body, just stood, as a long-standing tree branch knows when to leave its old root. Chief Raincrow returned to the center of the circle, where, the previous year, a wooden auction podium had stood. The plank had since been removed, but the ground still bore a depression, like a scar everyone avoided stepping on. He stood precisely there. Didn't step forward even an inch. He didn't bang a gavel, didn't raise his voice, just one sentence, enough to make all the winds in the valley stop blowing. The auction has ended, and he has chosen. Silence. No applause. No one asked, "How do you know he chose?" He didn't sign anything. He doesn't understand anything to choose, because everyone saw. Riven had chosen, not by bowing his head, not by licking a hand, but by not turning his back. A child held her mother's hand, looked over, and whispered, "He sat next to her, Mom." The mother nodded slightly, as if she herself was relearning how to see a creature not through commands, but through eyes. Solène turned to him, didn't smile, didn't rejoice, just said very softly, as if repeating something he had known for a long time. "From now on, you are Riven, not because someone named you, but because you didn't let yourself be erased." Chief Raincrow took a small, white-painted wooden sign from his pocket, its edges chipped. On it, just 2 words, hand-carved. Riven, chosen. He attached the sign to the pine post where the list of eliminated dogs used to hang. Right below was a large, old, mud-stained wooden board. No buyer yet. He took it down, not using a hammer, not asking for help, with his own hands. Slowly, as if removing a curse. Then he walked toward the small earthen kiln near the tree's base, where, in the past, papers of unmanageable cases were burned. People called it the forgetting kiln, but today it would not forget. It would remember. The chief placed the old sign into the kiln, lit a fire, not large, not blazing, just enough to burn slowly, so everyone could clearly see. The label "No buyer yet" no longer existed. Then he turned back, stood in the middle of the circle, and for the first time that day, he began to ask. Not to hear answers, but for everyone to hear themselves. Has anyone ever asked why that animal growled? No one answered. Has anyone ever asked why it turned its face away instead of jumping to bite? Still silence. Has anyone ever asked whether it remembers anyone? A young man bowed his head, unclear for what reason. Has anyone, when seeing the scar around its neck, ever placed a hand on their heart and asked, If I were held back too long, would I still know how to live freely? No one moved, only the wind, blowing very gently through the treetops. The chief turned to Solène, his voice slow but not sad. And finally, has anyone dared to look into those eyes, without hoping to be loved, without hoping for a wagging tail, without hoping for any positive sign, just to stay, because it deserves to live? An elderly woman shed tears, not out of pity, but because she remembered herself, when she once only hoped someone would see her without demanding anything. The chief looked around. His gaze didn't linger on anyone for too long. But each person, upon meeting it, felt as if they had just been illuminated, or just been silently questioned by something ancient. I used to believe the auction was for choosing, he concluded, but it turns out it was to wait, for a soul patient enough, not to demand, not to impose, not to claim as an achievement. From now on, no one would ask, how does she plan to take it away? Because Riven had left, without a leash, without a command, just a place to sit and someone who wouldn't leave. One early April morning, Solène hung a small sign on the wooden gate, where previously there had been no fence, no boundary, hand-painted, soft lettering, not using printed fonts, not formally framed. Just 2 lines. A place where pain doesn't need explaining. And below, in smaller letters, no therapy, no training, just being together. No line had an exclamation mark, no attempt to be persuasive. She didn't send out newsletters, didn't advertise, didn't erect medical signs, didn't register for online consultations. But people came. A middle-aged woman, with salt and pepper hair, tired eyes, carrying a torn wool scarf. A thin young man, always pulling his sleeves down, eyes looking out the window as if waiting for a signal to flee. A small boy, tiny, walking close to his mother but never looking up, only staring at the worn edges of her shoes. They didn't come to be healed. They didn't use that word, nor did they expect anyone to use it for them. They just came because there was no other place to sit, without being asked why. Solène didn't ask, didn't fill out information forms, didn't start with, "How are you feeling today?" She just poured tea. Hot tea, unsweetened, ceramic cups, not matching, sat together or not, depending on what each person wanted. She suggested a few seats on the porch, or by the window where the sun didn't shine directly. And Riven did nothing. He didn't approach anyone new, didn't nuzzle, didn't lick hands, didn't sit in the right spot to create a sense of safety. He just chose to sit next to the person trembling the most. An elderly man, once a firefighter, sat curled in a corner of the yard, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the calluses that once held a hose amidst flames. His shoulders trembled slightly. Not crying, not speaking, just trembling, like a guitar string stretched too long without release. Riven approached, didn't look at him, didn't touch, just lay down about 1/2 meter away, turned his back, not defensive, not approaching, just lay there, as if saying, "You can turn your back and you won't be hurt." 3 sessions, no change in position, no change in attitude. On the 4th session, the man gently touched Riven's back. Not firmly, just enough to feel life's warmth. Riven didn't turn his head, didn't react, just breathed, slowly, steadily, like a lullaby without music. And that very breath made a man who had lost his entire team in a fire begin to believe. One can live without needing permission. No need to be good. A volunteer once dropped by, carrying a thick notebook. She spoke to Solène, not unkindly, but with a tone of purpose. "Can I help with training? Run some reflex tests? Assess PTSD sensitivity levels?" Selene smiled, not sarcastically, gently but firmly. That's not necessary. We don't measure progress here. We don't count steps. We just remember who stays. The young woman said nothing, didn't argue. She simply closed her notebook and sat beside a man without a name. Together they watched Riven, lying in the corner of the yard, his head resting on a flat stone. Not performing, but present. Riven didn't know how to perform. He didn't shake hands, didn't sit on command, didn't fetch, didn't push wheelchairs like dogs in those emotional support videos, but he knew when someone was about to cry, and didn't want anyone to see. He would stand up, not quickly, not loudly, and block the view of others, not to make the person feel cared for, but so they wouldn't feel exposed in their most fragile moment. A teenage boy who had locked himself in his room for 2 months sat pressed against the old wall behind the porch. He didn't speak, just trembled. Riven came over and sat sideways, not facing him, not turning away either, just positioned himself parallel to the escape path, so that if the boy needed to run, he still could. That day the boy spoke for the first time. "This dog doesn't care if I'm okay or not. He just breathes with me." And Selene, from the kitchen, just bowed her head. Said nothing. Because that was the entire purpose of this place. A little girl, about 8, once lost in a refugee camp. She came with a young woman, perhaps an older sister or a volunteer guardian. No documents, no records, no official name. She didn't speak for 3 days, didn't cry, didn't scream. Only her eyes never stopped moving, darting constantly, as if the room might vanish at any moment. She feared the dark, even silence. Selene didn't ask why, didn't try to start a conversation, didn't make her tell. She simply read fairy tales each evening, not to lull to sleep, but to keep a human voice in the space. But in some passages, in the silent spaces between pages where Solene's voice faltered slightly, the girl's heartbeat would quicken like a drum. She gripped the edge of the blanket, her legs curled up as if ready to flee. Riven didn't intervene. He didn't come in like a savior, didn't jump on the bed, didn't nuzzle her like in those dogs comforting children clips. He simply stepped into the room, slowly, like a shadow shifting with the breeze. Then lay down, along the foot of the bed. Didn't rest his head, didn't press close. Just lay there, close enough that she could feel his warmth through the blanket. No forced cuddling, no whimpering, no attempt at interaction, just presence. That night, for the first time, the girl fell asleep without screaming, didn't jolt awake, didn't dream of a forest of people running away. Not because she was comforted, not because the story was perfectly told, but because another being had chosen to breathe beside her, as a signal, life is still here, quietly enduring. The next morning, Selene closed the book. The girl said nothing. She simply placed her hand on the blanket, where a faint black hair remained, and for the first time, she spoke. A single word. Him. Just that. But enough to make the older girl burst into tears, not from worry, but from relief. One time, a doctor visited the center. He offered to help Selene create assessment files, progress feedback charts for the people who came. Selene smiled, then pointed toward the porch, where Riven was sitting beside an old man who didn't speak. The man trembled, not from cold, but from too long without being touched without flinching. Riven didn't tremble. He sat, didn't touch, didn't turn. They both looked toward the distant mountains. No words, no clocks, but neither left. Selene said, just loud enough for the doctor to hear, "You see, No need to speak. No need to evaluate. Just, I won't leave until you're ready to stand. That evening, the doctor left no files. He only dropped a handwritten note into the mailbox. It's been a long time since I've seen someone be allowed to be themselves, without being fixed. Thank yous, without sound. The center never closed, had no operating hours, no appointment schedules, no fees. But each person who came had their own way of saying thank you. One woman quietly returned after 3 weeks. She didn't greet anyone, just climbed the roof and replaced a few loose tiles. A young man who once cried behind the porch because he couldn't find the right way to apologize to anyone came back with a box of homemade ginger cookies. No card. Just a note in the kitchen. You don't need to keep these. I just wanted to leave a little warmth. A young girl with dyed green hair and a shirt stained with paint painted a small spiral onto the old bricks near the well. Not too bold, not large, but identical to the symbol on Solenne's favorite scarf, a swirling line like the wind. No one called Riven a therapy dog. No one gave him an emotional support tag, because no one needed to name something if its presence was already clear enough. No one called Riven a therapy dog. No one hung an emotional support badge on him, because no one needed to name something when its presence already spoke for itself. Years later, during a dry, crisp autumn when the leaves fell earlier than usual, another auction was held at Sage Hollow. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, just a few wooden benches rearranged, a couple of white tents pitched, and the old auction podium dusted clean. Chief Raincrow was no longer there, but his name still echoed, passed down like a valley folktale between generations. Children tugged at Solenne's sleeve. They were used to her silvering hair, her worn scarf, and that quiet gaze that never raised its voice. Auntie Solenne, was it true that Riven didn't turn away when you came close? Why didn't he growl at you? Solenne didn't answer right away. She looked into the distance, toward a dip in the grass where the last light of the day slanted across the trunks of white pines. A place where a large, black-furred dog with eyes like burning steel had once growled 3 times, and no one dared stay after the third, except one person. Solenne. She sat down, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't tell it like someone who had won. She spoke like someone still sitting there, beside a soul that had never truly known peace. That day, I didn't come to take him home. I didn't come to rename him or prove anything at all. I just stood still, because I had nowhere else to go, and he looked at me, then growled. The children's eyes widened. You weren't scared? Solenne shook her head. A slow shake, not to deny fear, but to affirm that some fears matter less than the fear of being the next to walk away. I was scared, she said. But I was more afraid that once again someone would growl, and no one would stay. Now the wooden house by the forest's edge still stands, not big, not small, virtually unchanged over the years. Still no fence, still no nameplate. Just a circle of stones where people once sat. You could sit alone, you could sit together. No one asked why you came, no one asked when you'd leave. Beside that ring of stones is a low wooden bench, just the right height to rest an arm, and just enough for a dog to rest his head, without needing a cue. Riven, once the name scratched off every rescue list, once the name no one dared say aloud nearby, now walks slower. The fur around his neck has turned silver, but his eyes are the same as they were in the beginning, deep and not easily judged. He still sleeps by the door, but no longer to guard. Just out of habit, like how the night wind still brushes past old tiles, reminding that this place once knew pain. Solenne is no longer young, but her back remains straight, her eyes bright, and her voice, though lower, never wavers when she speaks of choosing to stay. A young woman, new to the center, asked curiously, "Why didn't you train Riven to shake hands, lie down, sit, like other therapy dogs?" Solène was cleaning an old sign, but paused. She ran her hand over a faded carving on the wood, where the letters from years ago still lingered. "Because he didn't come to make anyone feel better. He came to show them. Even if you growl, even if you tremble, even if you can't name your pain, there is still a being who will not turn away." The girl fell silent, then turned to look at Riven, lying beside an old man with memory loss who kept asking, "Where am I? Who am I?" And Riven didn't answer. He just laid his head gently on the man's knee, as if to say, "Even if you forget who you are, I still remember that you are human." That autumn, a new auction returned to Sage Hollow. Chief Raincrow was no longer there, but the old wooden podium stood again. The white pine, now taller, roots sunk deeper, still stood where it always had, as if no season had ever dared move it. The dog was brought out. A few people came to try. There was no growling, no particular reaction, but no spark either. The children followed Solène. They had grown up with the story of the dog who growled 3 times, and the one person who didn't walk away. They asked, "Did he not turn his back because you were good at it?" Solène smiled, not the smile of someone receiving praise, but the smile of someone who once learned something that can't be taught. "No, he didn't turn away, because that day I was the only one who didn't leave after the growl." The wind passed by. The scarf around Solène's neck fluttered lightly. The hand-stitched spiral on the fabric, now faint, still caught the afternoon light clearly. No one ever saw Solène cry, but the children knew. There were times she stood beside the stone bench, looking toward the forest's edge, as if waiting for someone to step out once more. On the wooden podium, where the sign once read, "No one has adopted," now stood a new wooden plaque. No names, no prices, just one line. "Not everyone who growls wants to attack. Some souls are only asking, will anyone stay this time?" That was the question Riven once asked, not with words, but with his eyes, with the way he stood still, with how he didn't lower his head, but also didn't turn away. And that day, in the golden light pouring through the pine forest, a child stepped up onto the podium. No number card in hand, no new clothes, just a scarf in hand, stitched with a spiral, clumsily but carefully. Solène looked at the child, then at Riven, now sleeping beneath the pine, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if still dreaming. She said nothing, just nodded. A single nod, like the one Chief Raincrow had once given her, like the nod she had once given to a soul who did not turn away, even when everyone else had. There are beings who don't need words, don't need training, don't need to prove value. They simply exist as a quiet reminder that love doesn't require full understanding. We live in a world that grows faster each day, where cries are often labeled as inconvenient, where silence is mistaken for coldness, where creatures who've been hurt are quickly deemed difficult, unsuitable, or worse, unworthy. But if we're willing to sit, just for a moment, in the presence of a soul growling out of fear, or an eye that avoids contact out of old betrayal, maybe we'll hear something no language can quite express. "I'm not demanding, I'm just asking. Will anyone stay this time?" Not everyone can train a dog, but anyone can choose not to walk away when a heart needs to be heard. Because sometimes, the one thing that keeps a being here isn't a leash or a reward, but a presence gentle enough not to frighten it one more time. And if someone once stayed with you when you growled, Try doing the same for another creature. You might not just save an animal. You might mend a broken circle within yourself.